I'm Nancy Sirianni. For many parents, school sports programs offer a unique opportunity to teach children the value of discipline, practice, sacrifice, and teamwork. Sports can help a child develop endurance and strength, build confidence and social skills. Parents of children in sports programs can also have some peace of mind, knowing that at least as long as their children are out on the playing field, they're out of trouble. But school fields may not be as safe as we think. In some states, pesticides are still being used on playing fields to control weeds, even as the evidence linking pesticide exposure with serious health problems continues to mount. At the other end of the spectrum, many communities are installing artificial or synthetic turf fields, despite growing concerns over the toxicity of the Crumb rubber infill used to cushion those fields. Today, on this final ChildSafe School webcast, the program's developer, Patti Wood, will talk about these issues, what parents need to know, and how we can let our kids get all the benefits of athletics without putting their health at risk. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the developer of the ChildSafe School, Patti Wood.
So thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about our ChildSafe School program once again, and our final core issue, which is the use of pesticides at schools. Our agenda for today will be the discussion of the precautionary principle, the problems with using pesticides at schools, and the controversies surrounding synthetic turf fields, which has become much more of a problem in today's school environments than ever before. So let's talk first about the precautionary principle. I'm going to read this to you because it's worth reading and listening to. When an activity raises threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary measures should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. In this context, the proponent of an activity, rather than the public, should bear the burden of proof. Now, these words were agreed upon by an international body of treaty negotiators, scholars, scientists, physicians, and lawyers who met at a wingspread conference in Racine, Wisconsin, back in 1998. The precautionary principle encourages policies that protect human health and the environment in the face of uncertain risks. Actually, it is not a new concept. For example, public health practitioners use the term primary prevention to mean much the same thing, and a doctor's obligation to first do no harm is actually a precautionary approach to treating sick people. The precautionary principle has four central components. One is taking preventive action even in the face of uncertainty. Two is shifting the burden of proof to the proponents of an activity or manufacturers of a product. Three is exploring a wide range of alternatives to possibly harmful actions. And finally, four, increasing public participation in decision-making. How the precautionary principle is different from other risk assessment tools also needs to be considered. Risk assessment and risk management are the tools currently used to protect against toxic environmental exposures. These methods have major shortcomings. They consider only one chemical at a time, not the synergistic effects of multiple chemical exposures which actually occur in everyday circumstances. They also fail to account for vulnerable populations such as children and pregnant women, and their unique exposure pathways. They also presume, even in the absence of toxicological testing data, that chemicals actually cause no injury to health until injury is irrefutably proven. Finally, scientific research on very profitable chemical products is often funded by the manufacturers themselves, a clear conflict of interest. Our children stand on the threshold of the future. They are completely dependent on someone else to advocate for them. The only way we can guarantee that we leave healthy future generations, rather than tragic stories of our short-sightedness, is to acknowledge that we can't always wait for scientific certainty or government regulators to make laws before we take action. We need to use the precautionary principle and make decisions that are fair and wise and most preventative of harm. In adopting the precautionary principle, we assume the role of guardians of this generation and all those to come, and we are taking steps to protect our children for the long term. For these reasons, using the precautionary principle as a guiding force at schools is 100% completely appropriate. Parents entrust the safety and health of their children to the administrators of their school district. Administrators, therefore, must identify those environmental risks in and around schools, whether proven or suspect, and reduce or eliminate them using the best alternative products or solutions available. So, today our focus is going to be on turf pesticides. The problem with turf pesticides. First of all, pesticides are designed to kill living things. They are universally recognized as some of the most toxic chemicals in use today. Prior to World War II, pesticides were not routinely used on our food crops, our golf courses, our lawns and gardens, or our school grounds. Times have changed. Multi-billion-dollar industries have grown up that are dependent on pesticides, and we are seeing surface and groundwater contamination, including our drinking water sources, aquatic organisms in decline and suffering from disease, wild birds being poisoned in our own backyards, important pollinators dropped to the lowest point in recorded history, resistant weeds and insects requiring greater amounts and more toxic pesticides, and people, especially our children, getting sick. Now, the EPA permits over 200 different pesticides to be used on lawns. They have been associated with birth defects, reproductive effects, endocrine disruption, asthma, and certain cancers. Nearly 100,000 accidental pesticide exposures are reported to poison control centers each year. And many of these exposures involve children, proving that current efforts to protect children are inadequate. 9 of the most toxic and persistent chemicals are pesticides. Many of those are from a class of pesticides called organochlorines. These are very persistent. They bioaccumulate in the environment. We find pesticides actually that are used in the United States and in other places in areas of the world that would never use them. For instance, in whales and in sea life in Arctic regions. Pesticide exposure is associated, as I said, with respiratory problems, endocrine disruption, neurological conditions, which I did not mention, as well as the things that I did, reproductive and certain cancers. Types of pesticides commonly used on turf. I'm not going to get too detailed or technical here, but primarily, insecticides cause the greatest number of pesticide poisonings in the United States. The most serious poisonings usually result from acute exposure to organophosphate or carbamate insecticides. Organophosphates and carbamates inhibit the enzyme cholinesterase, which causes disruption of the nervous system. All life forms with cholinesterase in their nervous system, such as insects, fish, birds, mammals, and humans, can be poisoned by these chemicals. And this is true of all of these different types of insecticides. I wanted to mention, although it's not on my slide, that we also commonly use an herbicide in a pesticide product that is designed to fertilize and to be a weed killer for, actually a pre-emergent weed killer, first thing every single spring. And that pesticide is called 2,4-D. It is one of 2 ingredients in Agent Orange, which some of you may know was the pesticide or the defoliant that was used in Vietnam during the war. And it is a very, very toxic pesticide or herbicide. And we are now seeing Vietnam vets who are suing the federal government for their own cancers and their children's birth defects. Reviewing again, pound for pound, children take in more environmental toxins than adults. Their bodies are undeveloped. They have undeveloped immune systems, detoxification systems, elimination systems. And because they are rapidly developing, there's a lot of cell division going on and growth. And whenever that is happening, there is a window of vulnerability. And in fact, a child's whole developmental period, which is from birth or even from conception through adolescence, I would consider a window of vulnerability. And of course, the natural behavioral patterns once again magnifies their risk. Children are actually playing on these fields in ways that adults would not. If you have an adult soccer team or baseball team out there, they're running around and only their shoes are touching the ground. Not so with children. Children do a lot of diving and lying on the ground with their faces in the grass, and they just behave differently, which magnifies that risk. We're going to show now a film clip of Dr. Leo Tresande. He's a pediatrician and pediatric environmental health researcher at NYU.
Once a toxic exposure occurs, the effects are permanent and lifelong, and you can't regain that moment in a child's development. We've moved from an era where we were focused on high-level exposures or massive, intense exposures to the reality that low-level exposures to environmental chemicals have equally significant effects on children's health. And so it's not the dose that makes the poison anymore. It's the exposure to a wide array of environmental chemicals, even at the lowest levels of exposure, that can harm children's health. We'll never have 100% evidence that a chemical causes a toxic injury. But we have a responsibility to our children to prevent that unnatural experiment from occurring, to prevent toxic exposure so that those children don't carry the burden of diseases in the future. It may be a small investment now, but by taking a precautionary approach to chemical safety, we can make a wise investment in the future of our children.
Dr. Trisande is really a leading researcher in this field and has authored many reports on children's environmental health, and especially the cost, the actual monetary cost for actually treating children once they have been harmed. And the numbers are staggering. It's in the billions of dollars to actually help our children who have been harmed, both medically and developmentally with their education. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about alternative methods of turf maintenance. Number one, we need to feed the soil, not the grass. This is all about, making our immune systems healthy. Same thing with making our soil healthy. We have healthy grass or healthy cabbages or healthy rose bushes wherever there is healthy soil. When it comes to a school playground or a playing field, the number one enemy is compaction. Just think of those thousands of little feet just pounding that soil, all day long. And compaction actually keeps roots from actually getting down deep into the soil. And so one of the most important things is to relieve that compaction. The way that happens is through aggressive aeration. And this is just a school system investing in a piece of equipment that actually puts little holes into the soil to relieve the compaction and to allow oxygen or air to get down in there where all these very important soil microbes live. We have beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi that are absolutely necessary for good and healthy plant growth. And they need that air. They need sometimes those spaces in the soil that gives them an opportunity to move around and let those roots grow as well. Okay, regular overseeding. The best managers of turf fields or school grounds understand that because of this constant use and because of the compaction that they need to overseed, not only aerate, but overseed constantly right from the beginning of the season, the growing season, until the end. It's not just seed in the fall, which is what we tell homeowners, but in schools we want to seed all throughout the growing season so that you always have new plants coming up to replace any of those bare spots that may occur from overuse when kids are playing particular sports where they're always in the same area of the field. And then careful irrigation. You can actually create more problems with poorly managed irrigation by watering at night, for instance. You are actually inviting fungal problems or turf diseases, fungus diseases into your beautiful property. And that can be really alleviated by understanding how to irrigate, how deep to irrigate, once a week or maybe twice a week if you have a drought condition or very little rainfall. But these are important things. So it's really feeding the soil, not the grass. You can do this with compost or compost tea on a regular basis. You can't over-compost a property. You can over-fertilize it. But this type of fertilizer is just feeding all those soil microbes that are so critical. And so then number one enemy, compaction, you relieve that compaction through aggressive aeration and aggressive overseeding, and then carefully irrigating. It seems simple. It's something that all turf managers at school could really do a good job with. And now we're going to hear from Chip Osborne, who is one of the country's leading experts in natural turf maintenance, as well as 2 school facilities directors who are doing it right.
The natural organic turf management program simply works more with nature and what nature has in place and can in fact produce excellent quality athletic fields. Generally speaking, municipal properties and athletic fields are under constant heavy use. Compaction is turf grass's #1 enemy, so it's our job at the municipal level, if we want to maintain good athletic fields, to continually relieve that compaction. We use a natural organic fertilizer, we do a compost top dress, a heavy and vigorous overseeding, and then either a core or slice aeration several times during the growing season. When we combine all of these things around a predetermined program, then we're able to grow good, healthy grass.
Even if the quality of the fields dropped a little, we were willing to live with that, and they haven't. Actually, the fields are as green, as full, and as healthy as they've ever been. And I feel good, because if somebody goes, oh, what are you guys putting down? I'll say, you can go on it virtually 2 minutes after we're done laying the stuff down. It's been something that we can, as a town, can say, look, we've made this effort, and the fields haven't deteriorated. In fact, we have some of the nicest ball fields in the New Haven County.
This is pesticide free here for 20 years. I don't know what else I can say other than this is what happens with organic products. They've not added a synthetic fertilizer or pesticide to these grounds for 20 years.
New York State has a law, and it's a pretty impressive law. We basically have said that no pesticides will be used on playing fields at schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, in all private, public, and parochial schools, including preschool. Outside New York State, we have training materials that we have developed as part of our ChildSafe School program, which you can have access to. They are actually videos. You can actually take the training yourself, you and your staff, to learn about how to maintain your fields without the use of pesticides. There are also other materials that can guide you to other organizations that are expert in this, like the Northeast Organic Farming Association and other organizations in other regions of the country. It's very, very important that we move this New York State law to other states. It's working well in New York. We have done a good job at training New York State school facilities directors, and we would like to offer the same kind of training to school facility directors across the country. Now, I would like to talk about an emerging health threat at schools, and this is my last opportunity in this series of webcasts to talk about something that's very dear to my heart, and that is synthetic turf. A lot of our school fields are being used not only by our students and interscholastic sports teams, but they are also used by the community. And this means that there's a great pressure put on a school district to make sure that those fields are playable. And we are looking at 2 different things. We are looking at trying to address this need or demand for sports fields. And at the same time, we are looking at a way to get rid of a toxic waste product or recycling a toxic waste product. And so we have decided that grinding up tires or used vehicle tires would be a great source for filling plastic or synthetic turf fields. And there is great concern about the hazards of the chemicals that are in tires. The chemicals range from carcinogens, known carcinogens, such as arsenic and benzene, cadmium, carbon black, which makes up about 40% of a tire, is also a human carcinogen. We're concerned about other heavy metals like lead and mercury, which are found in tires. And the list goes on and on and on. There are probably at least 50, maybe more different types of chemicals. And we don't actually know from tire to tire exactly what chemicals are used to produce that tire, because these tires are produced for many different uses. They're produced for cars, and then for trucks, and then for construction vehicles, and so on. And so they're all designed for a particular use, and so the chemicals that they use are different. And there's no way for us to know that. When they grind up 40,000 tires, there's no way to know the exact chemical composition of what's in that infill in that field. They are also concerned at this point, now that these fields have been in use for several years, that they burn easily, because tires are very flammable. So they're beginning to put flame retardant chemicals into the fields, as well as anti-static chemicals, because plastic is a static material, and kids are getting shocked from playing on these fields. They also use a lot of disinfectants on these fields. Now, disinfectants are actually considered pesticides. They have to be registered as pesticides with the Environmental Protection Agency. So the idea that that we're moving away from grass fields where pesticides have to be used, and we're going to these synthetic turf fields where we don't need to use these chemicals, is absolutely not true. Why do they use disinfectants on the fields? Because of the body fluid spills. You know that when you're looking at a football team, or two football teams playing, that there's a lot of sweat, there's a lot of saliva, blood, and vomit, who knows, a lot of body fluids that wind up on these fields. We also know that there's an increased rate of MRSA from playing on these fields. Also, unusual injuries. We see a lot of joint injuries. We see a very unique injury that only occurs on synthetic turf called turf toe. This is a sprain of the big toe, and it actually puts players out of commission for long periods of time. In fact, professional sports players will tell you that they would rather play on grass. And if they had to give you one reason, it would be because of the injuries that they sustain on the artificial turf versus playing on natural grass. Another huge issue with synthetic turf is the high temperatures. Because of the black tires, these fields absorb a lot more heat. On a very hot day with a lot of sunshine, let's say the temperature's in the low 90s, those fields could actually get up to 180 or 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Once that occurs, you have real risks from heat-related illnesses. And these are very, very, very serious illnesses in some cases that could actually lead to death. Another thing that we're worried about with the high temperatures is that kids become dehydrated. And they are trying to address this by selling not only a $1.5 million field to a school district, but also water cannons. Because when those fields get really hot, they say, well, you can just water them down. And that does bring the temperature down, but it only lasts for about 20 minutes, at which time the play will have to stop again. You'll have to water down the fields with these cannons, and then wait until the temperature rates again, and go through that same process over and over throughout the game. Disposal problems at the end of its life, which is somewhere between 7 and 12 years, depending on the amount of time that kids are playing, or the community is playing on that field. They need then to be replaced. How do you replace a field? I mean, how do you dispose of a field, a football field size piece of plastic, and then 40,000 ground up tires? Where does that go? It's another huge expense to dispose of this, and not all landfills will accept this type of refuse. Cost comparison, synthetic versus natural, there really is, it's a very, very clear that a synthetic turf field will cost a lot more than even just upgrading, starting from scratch with your grass field and upgrading that field. That's an initial cost for upgrading that field. The initial cost would be somewhere, depending on how many fields you're doing, but about 50 to 70% less than buying a new synthetic turf field. I want to just talk very, very quickly about, about the ChildSafe School program. We have looked at these problems at schools that we consider chronic low-level exposures. Our kids are in school for long periods of time during their most important developmental years, and we want so importantly to utilize the precautionary principle, which was the first thing we talked about here today when we are talking about toxins in the school environment. So I really hope that many of you will contact us on Facebook, either with comments or suggestions about this program, and please send us your questions, and we will have a discussion very soon. Thank you so much.
Looking to make your school a safe and healthy place for everyone and want to know where to begin? The ChildSafe School Resource Guide is a great place to start. The Resource Guide contains scientific information about each of the program's core issues, along with Q&A sheets, sample policies, and short documentary videos featuring respected medical and scientific experts. The videos are designed to help you introduce these subjects to stakeholders in your school community, and the support materials provide the backup for taking specific action. The guide also contains information about emerging issues, as well as an advocacy section with a step-by-step checklist to keep everyone involved. The guide is free for New York residents and only $12 for non-residents. To order, simply click the button at the bottom of this webcast page or call our office at 516-883-0887 after the webcast. And thank you for your interest in making your school a truly child-safe school.
Portions of this program are supported in part by funding from the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute through a grant from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute or the Department of Environmental Conservation.
We're here once again with Patti Wood for some Q&A on today's webcast. So, the precautionary principle. Just to reiterate that, this is so important. It's a guideline that states when an activity simply raises a threat that action should be taken even if the science is not fully established.
Right.
And that the proponent or the subscriber of that activity should need to prove the absence of harm.
That's right. That's actually called shifting the burden of proof to the proponents or the proponents of an activity or the manufacturers of a product. Right now, the burden of proof is on the consumer or on a person who is being harmed by something. And they have to try to prove that this thing, whatever it is, has actually caused harm. When very, very difficult to do.
I was struck by you speaking of the possible tragic stories of our short-sightedness.
Right. Well,
and I often wonder, like, how the world will look back on these centuries or whatever, where we have regularly allowed industry to introduce substances into our lives without proof that they will do no harm, using human lives as the testing ground for their products, and often we find these chemicals are most decidedly not benign, right? It's a little crazy, right?
Well, you know, as a society, we've decided that technological advancement and product advancement is a good thing, and that, you know, if you step back from it, you're going backwards. You're not moving forward. You're not progressing with, you know, the human experience. Here are all these people inventing all these chemicals in these laboratories and figuring out how to make products that supposedly can make our life better. And so when we step back and say, well, wait a minute, maybe this is actually not making our life better. Maybe there's actually some harm here. There's real pushback to that. It's
well, human beings as collateral damage is pretty personal if it's you.
That's right. And the reason that we focus on children so much in our work, not only with the ChildSafe School, but in all the work that we do, is that children are the most vulnerable in our population. And we've talked about why that is. I mean, physiologically, it's absolutely without question that they're more vulnerable. And then behaviorally as well,
Right.
without question that they're more vulnerable. So we look at that subpopulation, and we think we need to make laws and regulations that protect our most vulnerable. And then by default, we're protecting everyone in our society.
And that's what this whole program is about, all the stuff that we've
That's
talked
right,
about in the
that's
last
right.
3 webcasts.
Right, and I just want to go back to the precautionary principle. I love this whole concept. And really, it's an old concept. Like I said, first do no harm. That's really what it is. It's like first do no harm. So if there is an indication that harm is being done, either to people or to the environment or to wildlife or to our water supply or our air quality, whatever it is, that we should step back and say, wait a minute, let's take some precautionary measures here to make sure that we're not doing harm. That cannot
Better to be safe than sorry,
better-
right? I mean, it's
and
pretty,
that's
basic.
another way to talk about the precautionary principle, which is better safe than sorry.
Right.
Very simple concept, but a very powerful concept. And it's being used in other countries all over the world to develop policy on things. So we're just not embracing this the way the rest of the world is. And there are many reasons for that. Socialized medicine and so on. But we're just not embracing the precautionary principle the way we need to be in this day and age, where there's so many things.
You are advocating that the importance of that principle in pretty much everything that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So pesticides on turf fields. School districts have been using fertilizers and pesticides for years, right? So you advocate a transition, let's say, back to natural maintenance.
Right.
Is it as simple as just ending the use of pesticides and introducing the program that you have in the ChildSafe School resource guide? It's just it sounds like a little bit of investment, right? You've got to buy an aerator and some grass seed, but it's pretty much as simple as that.
Inexpensive
Right.
investments.
Well,
Really
and,
inexpensive investment. So you yourself actually just used the word, should we just go back? Should we go back to the old-fashioned way? Should we go back? It's not going back. There have been many advances in natural turf care.
Right.
In the old days, we didn't have these state-of-the-art aeration, machines that we have today. We didn't have ways to actually make compost very easy to spread. We're using compost tea. We have compost tea brewers where it's incredibly simple to brew compost tea and then use it on a field or on a school ground. It's very, very easy to do with the new technology. I think it's the fastest growing segment of the green industry. When I say the green industry, I mean the landscaping industry and the professional landscaping industry. There's a lot of new innovation going on, and we are also allowing science to help us create these new innovations. We're finding out more about how important beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizal fungi are, for instance, to healthy plant growth. And so if we can inoculate our soil with more of these beneficials, they will outcompete the disease-causing pathogens that are in the soil. So, but pesticides, when you use a pesticide, these are non-specific chemicals. In other words, they will kill everything. Including your target organism, but a lot of non-target organisms as well. So that's the concern, is that the use of these pesticides for years and years and years has basically made the soil sterile, an unhealthy place.
And it's a vicious cycle.
For plant
Again.
growth, and it's a vicious cycle.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's the number one pesticide that's used?
We have all this list of this list of pesticides. We first started out with the organochlorines like DDT and furans and so on, and then we developed the organophosphate class and carbamates. And these began to just we started working with these pesticides that would just target an insect's nervous system. We kind of liked that because they were very effective. So then we created synthetic pyrethroids, which are actually the synthetic version of pyrethrum, which actually comes from chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums, they looked like, chemically they were able to actually affect or have an impact on an insect's nervous system.
Because they can be crushed so fine. Is that's
well?
what
I mean, in the early days, they were actually using chrysanthemums, that were powdered, but that was not practical. No one's going to make a lot of money, so we created these synthetic versions of it. It works in exactly the same way as the chrysanthemum or the pyrethrum. And then the newest one, and the one that is most used worldwide as an insecticide, is the neonicotinoid class. And of those neonicotinoids, the chemical that is the one that is the most frequently used is imidacloprid. It has a trade name of merit. But it's very valuable to the agricultural industry, to landscapers, because you can actually only apply it to the soil. You can actually coat the seed with it, and the chemical can actually get into the plant. In other words, it becomes systemic, so that it is in the flower, it's in the fruit, it's in the leaves, it's in the stem. And this is why this particular chemical, which is the most widely used chemical in the world, is having an impact on our bee population. We haven't proven it definitively that neonicotinoids are the cause of the colony collapse disorder. These are our key pollinators,
but this is the
killing
theory.
Honeybees and bumblebees. But it looks very interesting and very provocative, and so it looks like not only are we killing off our pollinators, which are basically responsible for our food supply, but they're also impacting us in a way, even though it's small amounts. If it's having an impact on the nervous system of an insect, it will ultimately have an impact on us. And there are some human health effects of all of these pesticides that are used that are intended to kill weeds, to kill insects, to kill fungal diseases and turfgrass diseases.
Now, what's the name of it again? It's amazing that you
It's
know all these.
Imidacloprid, and that is a neonicotinoid pesticide.
Is that
neonicotinoid is a class of pesticides.
Is that something that somebody's going to read on a product label? I mean, obviously.
No, they're not going to read that it's a neonicotinoid pesticide.
No.
No.
But is that the?
It'll say active ingredient imidacloprid, and then it'll have inert ingredients, and that's upwards of 90% of the product. Yikes. And the inert ingredients can be also harmful, but we just don't know what they are. See, inert ingredients do not have to be disclosed, and so that's problematic. They're carriers, they're surfactants, they do all kinds of things. They're solvents, and they do all kinds of things, in that pesticide product to make it more effective.
And those are not tested or just not disclosed?
We're only looking at individual chemicals. I think I said this in my brief talk, and that is that we're only looking at the individual chemical, not at the synergistic effects of all the chemicals, not only all the chemicals within the product itself, but all the other chemicals that you're exposed to or that you may be actually applying at the same time or within a week or within a couple of days of another application.
And you also said that the research on the effects of these chemicals are being done by the chemical companies themselves.
Well, that's very common, and it's quite well acknowledged that you have to be very careful about the research that you're reading, even if it's peer-reviewed academic research, because you have to follow the money. You have to know who's funding that research. It's one of the things that we did here was to create a digest of the independent science on turf pesticides and children's health.
That's a big book.
It's a big book, and we actually created this so that we could show decision makers and lawmakers, both on the local and state level, that there was a growing body of science, independent science, showing that pesticides can actually do harm to our children's health. This is all just about children's health.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and pesticides. So, this is even though it's the last part of our ChildSafe School web, program, it's really probably the most important, because pesticides are not only used at schools on turf, but they're also used inside for like roach control,
Right, I was gonna ask you about
for
that.
rodent control and so on. And they're also used structurally for termite control. And so we intentionally did not address the indoor use of pesticides, because children are not typically crawling under the stoves and refrigerators in school cafeteria kitchens. But kids are
yeah.
on those fields. And so their greatest exposure is on the turf and the school grounds. And it's also the easiest one to manage. It's also the easiest one to just say, okay, here's the alternative. This is what you can do. You can still have your beautiful, your playing fields. You can still have your football field. You can still have your school grounds and your playing grounds without using these toxic pesticides. As a matter of public health concern, we don't have that same, ability to do that when you're talking about something that may actually be, a public health risk inside a school, whether it's roaches or
Right.
ants or bees or whatever it is. And then structurally, pretty much they're using baits now for termites, for structural pests.
So some schools are using something called an IPM program?
Yes,
Is that the same thing?
IPM is Integrated Pest Management. It was originally Integrated Pesticide Management, and then it was shortened, and it was created in cooperation and in partnership with the pesticide industry as a safer, greener way to maintain schools, to maintain office buildings, to whatever.
And is it?
An IPM program is only as good as the person who's administering it. It sounds good. It says basically that you are to use the least toxic method of eradicating a pest first. That's your first approach. But if that doesn't work, everything else is on the table. You are allowed to use
that's
any
convenient.
pesticide you want. Now, if you have somebody administrating an IPM program, an integrated pest management program, and they're not really careful, they don't really want to spend the time to use an alternative way to get rid of let's say, for instance, a patch of crabgrass or, a bunch of dandelions or whatever, fence line weeds, then they're going to say, well, this doesn't really work.
They have the option to do what they want.
They have the option to do whatever they want. So that's why an integrated pest management program is something that we do not advocate, especially for schools.
You said, one of the things you said was that 9 of the 12 most persistent chemicals are pesticides. Explain persistent. Does it have to do with the accumulation in our bodies? What is that?
Well, persistence means that they just last in the environment, and they actually move in the environment. They can actually move through the ground into groundwater supplies. They can actually move into surface water if they run off. If they become airborne, they can move through the atmosphere, which is what I was saying, that if you're using let's say, for instance, you're using DDT or chlordane, 2 organochlorine pesticides, that you could actually find those pesticides hundreds and hundreds or thousands of miles away on this planet.
Or in a
because
whale, as you were saying.
Because they've moved through the environment, because they last so long.
So they don't break down?
They don't break down. Some of them, they break down into other what they call metabolites, okay? These are breakdown products. They can break down into metabolites that are less toxic, and they can actually break down into metabolites that are more toxic.
Ooh,
Yeah.
wow.
So in other words, if we're looking for DDT in the body, we will find its breakdown product. We'll find DDE in the body, not DDT.
Okay, interesting. So, sports are pretty big.
Oh,
at
they're very
most
big,
schools.
very big.
And schools seem to be pretty proud of their perfect playing fields. How, I mean, I know this is what we're doing here, is trying to put this in the forefront so people know exactly what they're dealing with. But how do we address the fact that people want these perfect fields?
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic that goes on within a school district. You've got the parents of student athletes who, with their children, would like to have quote-unquote state-of-the-art athletic facilities so that these children can do very well in sports so that they might get an athletic scholarship to school. Not a bad plan. I mean, schools are extremely expensive. You can get an athletic scholarship for your child, and that's a really good thing. You're saving yourself $100,000 or more, or $200,000. Probably $200,000, right?
I would imagine.
Okay, so you have that factor, or that faction, I should say, within the school community. And then you have the coaches who know that there's a tremendous demand for these fields. They want practice time, they want, game time. And if you're in a fairly small school district, all the different grade levels are playing on the same fields. So you may have elementary school kids playing on the high school field. That's another problem. Is it because the younger the child is, the more vulnerable? Right. Although there are special vulnerabilities for teens and adolescents going through puberty, the lungs do not stop developing until 17, 18, 19, 20 years of age. So if there's an asthmatic condition going on, not an asthmatic, if there's an asthmagen, in a chemical or in something that is being utilized on a field, that's problematic actually for an older child. And if you have a child who's, 9, 10, 11 years old going through prepubescence and then through puberty, that's an extremely vulnerable child, extremely vulnerable for what we would consider endocrine disrupting chemicals or hormone disrupting chemicals. Hormones can be changed on a, just like that. And they work at incredibly low levels, which is why endocrine disrupting chemicals are actually more dangerous at lower levels than they are at higher levels. And I think Dr. Trisandi was talking about that. We've always thought that the dose makes the poison, but in the case of endocrine disruptors, that is not the case. A smaller amount, a chronic low-level exposure of a smaller amount.
So we need to change our priorities. With this knowledge, obviously.
Yeah.
People will...
Yeah. But going back, because I think it was a good question, so, football fields, sports, very important. So what answer do we give them? Well, first of all, let's say that the majority of professional athletes want to play on natural grass. And the reason is because of injuries.
I know the women's soccer team had a whole issue with that.
Absolutely. The reason is because of injuries, because if you're injured, then you're out. So they are no longer valuable to their team. And so there's a real problem with professional athletes having to take time off to heal from an injury. A lot of injuries occur on artificial turf that do not occur on natural grass.
Right.
Now, you have the proponents of this technology who are the field turf manufacturers, and they will come in and say, fewer injuries, you never have to mow it, so environmentally it's better, you don't have to use pesticides, but that's not really true because you have to use disinfectants, and you can play year-round and 24/7. Put some lights up and you can be playing at 3 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the winter.
If you want to.
Well, you had... Yeah.
I get it.
So that's very attractive to this, to the parents of student athletes and to coaches and to school districts because, they hang their hat on their football teams. So then you have the parents who are concerned, the parents who have read about synthetic turf being unsafe in multiple ways. And so they're at the school board meeting saying, hey, wait a minute. Isn't our first priority to protect our children? And then you have the proponents saying there's no proof. There's no proof. There are no studies that say that it's
Precautionary principle.
exactly. That's
Let
why
me,
the
I have
precautionary
a question
principle-
on Facebook. I want
Yeah.
to address that. Do you advocate for synthetic turf if the crumb rubber is made of something non-toxic? Is the plastic grass safe?
Okay, so we have not, well, there are non-toxic infills. Coconut hulls, rice hulls, cork, and these are natural products, probably not toxic, but because they are natural products, they can degrade in the environment. In other words, they can get
Right.
moldy, they can begin to come apart, and so on.
And I guess
basically, they're going
injuries
to
would be the same.
compost, right? Eventually,
Right, and wouldn't injuries be the same?
injuries are going to be pretty much the same.
Yeah.
They're pretty much the same. So we have these natural surfaces, and they're also talking about sand as an alternative. If you're talking about something like MRSA or something that, an antibiotic-resistant bacterial infection, soil contains all of these microbes, these beneficial microbes that will actually take human
Secretions.
secretion. I know when they're not secretions. That's it. Body fluids.
Body
That's
fluids,
it. Body
okay.
fluids. Okay, that take body fluids and will actually render them harmless.
Right.
Okay, on a synthetic turf field that has grass on it or rubber infill from the recycled tires, they can't hold
Right.
that kind of microbial life. And so they're not able to do that. Sand has very little ability to hold microbial life, and certainly tires have none. So those are not perfect. There is something called Nike fill or Nike grind, and that's where they're actually using this PVC/rubber, from Nike factory, scraps.
Is it less toxic than
Well,
car
see,
tires?
we don't have
There's not
any
enough
studies
evidence.
on this. We just don't know. But if it's PVC, it's polyvinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride is a known human carcinogen.
Yo, wow.
So nothing is perfect except natural grass. But you can't just say we're going to have natural grass without learning how to maintain it so that it is as useful a surface as artificial turf.
I
And it's
always
possible.
go back to how kind of nutty it is, because we know that the carcinogens are in the tires, and we're shredding them up and putting them in artificial turf.
Well, as a nation, we're always looking for ways to take waste products, which are enormously problematic as far as getting rid of them safely. There are landfills that won't accept them for other reasons besides their toxicity as well, because they're mosquito breeding sites because of their shape.
Right.
They hold rainwater.
Right.
There have been trials. They tried to make an artificial reef in Florida, off the coast of Florida, from tires, and they found that it actually literally poisoned that entire underwater region, and now they are actually pulling them out at great expense. It's not a great idea to put them, if there was a tire dump next to your child's school, people would be up in arms.
Right.
They'd be up in arms. They would be, they would be in the
How ironic.
streets and saying, get that tire dump out of there. The toxic material. And yet, they're pushing their school districts to put in these artificial turf fields and bringing in 40,000 tires and dumping them in the field.
Well, you're doing a very valuable service by getting this information out there
Well,
to people,
we like to
so they know.
offer, we have to offer an alternative. We can't say just don't do it.
Right.
You have to say don't do it, but this is what you do instead.
So I was going to ask how you get the schools to adopt this precautionary principle, but obviously that's what this program is about. So all this information, the science, the studies, are included in this resource guide.
That's correct.
That's available to everybody. But it's more than that. There's model policy in here for all of the issues we've addressed in the webcast series: diesel exhaust, cleaning products and fragrances, pesticides, and synthetic turf, plus a section called the Healthy Lawn Program, which gives you
Basically,
the details.
it's a step-by-step.
Did you say it was a training program?
Yes,
or-
we have a training program.
have a
It's
training
actually
program.
on DVD. So you can actually, in an off time, sit down with your staff or have your staff sit down, on a rainy day when they can't be outside and actually watch this program and learn.
Well, thank you. We're out of time, but this was very enlightening. This whole series has been some amazing information that everybody needs to know, especially parents and teachers. That's going to do it for this final webcast of the ChildSafe School program. Thanks to all of you who tuned in, and to our physicians, our scientific advisory board, and our other experts who helped us develop this program. Thanks also to the New York State Pollution Prevention Institute for their support. Please feel free to contact us for copies of the resource guide and in additional information if you would like. Thank you very much for watching.